Vienna, 1906, as the bells of Stephansdom tolled noon and the snow fell light and soundless over the Hofburg Palace. Sibella Norwood adjusted her shawl as the wind cut down the stone corridor, sending flurries dancing past the guards stationed at the imperial entrance. Her fingers were raw from the cold, ink-stained from the morning's transcriptions, and trembling with nerves. She had been summoned personally by the emperor's senior advisor. Not by a clerk. Not by a steward. By him. She clutched the folded note in her coat pocket, its wax seal already broken. The handwriting had surprised her, elegant but unornamented, direct. Like the man himself. The guards opened the door without a word. Their halberds gleamed in the light from the crystal chandelier above as she stepped into the grand antechamber. Velvet drapes muffled the outside world. Gilt-framed oil portraits of long-dead Habsburgs watched from the walls. He was already there. Valen Mercier stood beside the eastern window, hands clasped behind his back, the gray daylight outlining his silhouette. He did not turn right away. "You came," he said, voice low. "That was uncertain." Sibella's mouth went dry. "I don't disobey summons." Valen turned slowly. His face was sharply drawn, with a high brow and deep-set eyes that rarely gave anything away. He wore the dark green uniform of a senior imperial officer, the gold aiguillettes brushing his chest. At 31, he was younger than most in his position, but no less powerful. "You're not under my command," he said. "I asked." "You answered." "That matters." She stiffened, unsure what this was. "You said you needed help reviewing the treaty drafts for Bosnia." "I do," Valen said, stepping closer. "But that's not the only reason I asked for you." Her breath caught. Not because of the words but because of the way he looked at her. As if she wasn't just a court translator who barely earned her keep, but something more. Something seen. "You're the only one in this palace who speaks both Ottoman Turkish and Hungarian without mangling the grammar," he added, softer now. "And I need someone I can trust." "Trust is dangerous here," she said, quieter than she meant. He gave a short nod. "That's why I keep few allies. And no friends." A silence stretched between them. The snow beyond the window fell harder now, a hush over the city. Then his eyes flicked to the hallway. "Come. We must be quick. The emperor will be in council within the hour." They crossed the corridor, fast steps echoing over marble. He led her not to an office, but to a narrow stairwell behind a tapestry of Charles V. They descended 3 flights into a private chamber lined with books and maps. A fire burned low in the grate. Sibella turned to him as he locked the door behind them. "Why the secrecy?" "Because what I'm about to show you," Valen said, pulling a leather folio from the desk, "could cost both of us our positions." He opened it. Inside were hand-drawn maps not of Bosnia or Herzegovina, but of the railway lines running through Serbia and Montenegro. Some were marked in red ink, others annotated in Ottoman script. "These aren't from our archives," she said, frowning. "No. They were intercepted. Smuggled. They suggest a planned Ottoman incursion through the Balkans. Or at least a threat. If the emperor sees this before it's verified, we could be forced into war." Sibella stepped back, heart-pounding. "Why tell me?" "Because you read these languages better than anyone in Vienna. And because I don't want this war." He stepped closer, voice low. "I want your mind, Sibella. Not just your translation. Your judgment." She stared at him. "You're risking everything." "And so are you," Valen said. "Will you help me?" She swallowed, pulse hammering. "Yes." Only then did he smile, not the kind worn at court, but something real. Gentle. Tired. They spent the next 2 hours bent over the documents, cross-referencing phrases, tracing routes, debating implications. Valen's focus never wavered, but sometimes, when their hands touched over a map or their shoulders brushed as they leaned in, his glance lingered. When the fire burned low and the bells rang for 4, Valen stood. "You should go. If you're missed." "I'll say I was in the archives," she offered. He hesitated. "It's not safe, Sibella. If anyone suspects." "Then be careful what you ask of me next," she interrupted, chin lifting. He looked down at her, eyes searching. "I will." As she turned to go, he caught her wrist lightly. The glove between them made it feel less like a touch, but it wasn't. "Thank you," he said. She didn't answer. Just nodded and slipped from the room. That night, as she walked back to her quarters across the frost-glazed courtyard, a folded slip of paper was tucked beneath the tea tray waiting on her desk. It read only, "Tomorrow. First light. The greenhouse." Sibella slept in her dress. The next morning, the greenhouse was dim with steam. Glass panes dripped from the warmth inside, orchids blooming in still, hot silence. She stepped through the door and he was already waiting. He didn't speak. Just handed her a sealed envelope. "A coded letter," he said. "From a Turkish envoy. I need your help deciphering it." She opened it, read one line and froze. "It's not about the railway," she whispered. "It's about an alliance. A secret one." Valen's jaw clenched. "Then we're already behind." He looked at her, really looked, and something shifted between them. The danger was no longer theoretical. It was here. Now. "I'll help you stop it," she said. His hand brushed her sleeve, just once. Then he turned and led her deeper into the steam and shadows of the greenhouse, where no one could see what bloomed between them. The greenhouse had lost much of its warmth by the time they left. Morning fog clung to the palace grounds, softening the outlines of the statues that lined the gravel path to the east wing. Sibella adjusted the ribbon at her collar, her gloves damp from the condensation on the glass door she'd held open. Valen walked beside her in silence until they reached the low archway near the servants' entrance. His voice came quiet, deliberate. "We can't speak again in that place. It's watched now." Sibella glanced up, her brows drawing faintly together. "How do you know?" "I saw a man I know from the Foreign Office. Pretending to study the camellias." She folded the letter deeper into her coat. "Then we find another place." His eyes met hers. "I've arranged one." She didn't ask where. She didn't need to. That evening, the scent of roasting chestnuts drifted through the streets near Rotenturmstrasse. Sibella kept her head down as she passed the baker's window, her cloak hood pulled low. She crossed to the alley beside the printmaker's shop, where Valen waited, half shrouded in the shadow of the eaves. He led her through a narrow corridor that opened into a small atelier above the bindery. It was cramped, but orderly, dusty books stacked precisely, drafting instruments laid out in a tray. A single oil lamp cast a steady gold light over the table where he'd already unrolled a copy of the intercepted letter, now partially decoded. He gestured to a second chair and sat without ceremony. The cipher uses Ottoman poetic structure. Rhymed couplets. "I missed it yesterday." Sibella leaned in, studying the graceful curve of the calligraphy. "This isn't diplomatic language. It's religious." Valen turned to her. "You're certain?" "The phrasing, the path to renewal begins where the crescent drinks the Danube, that's more than metaphor. It's a reference to the Mahdiist texts. This isn't about borders. It's about ideology." He exhaled, slow. "Then the threat is deeper. Not a military movement. A realignment." She began translating aloud, line by line, hearing the weight of it settle between them. When she reached the phrase invoking the silent gate within the empire's oldest city, Valen stood abruptly. "That's Szentendre." She looked up. "Why would they meet there?" "Because it's Hungarian soil. But far from Budapest. And not under direct imperial surveillance. The silence that followed was taut. Then, without looking at her, he asked, "When did you last see your father?" The question landed sideways, unexpected. "Before Sarajevo," she said, carefully. "He left to teach in Trieste. He wrote, but only once." Valen's expression shifted. "Then you understand what it means to be left behind by someone who chose duty over blood." She nodded slowly. "I don't forgive it." He didn't speak for a moment. Then, more quietly, "Neither do I." They worked late, the lamplight dimming as the oil burned low. When the final lines of the cipher were translated, Valen folded the paper and tucked it into a compartment beneath the floorboards. He reached for his overcoat. "You should go before the curfew. I'll walk you part of the way." Sibella hesitated. "Why are you doing this yourself? You have aides. Secretaries. Why trust me?" He adjusted the lapel of his coat, gaze steady. "Because you have no allegiance to their ambitions. You live between worlds. They don't understand that, but I do." She stepped toward the door, then paused. "You said you keep no friends." "I said I keep few." His voice was softer now. "I never said I didn't want any." Outside, the snow had begun again, finer than before, catching in the folds of their coats as they walked along the quiet street. The gas lamps flickered in the wind. At the corner near the old apothecary, Sibella touched his arm lightly. "Tomorrow. If you have the Santander routes, I can mark the likely meeting sites." Valen nodded. "I'll bring them." She stepped back, her face half-shadowed beneath the hood. "You should be careful, Valen." His reply was quiet. "Not everyone is worth the risk. But you might be." She turned without answering and disappeared into the dark. Behind her, the snow erased her footsteps faster than he could follow them. The map arrived folded inside the sleeve of a ledger, passed to Sibella discreetly by the steward who delivered the day's files to the translation office near Michaelerplatz. She waited until she was alone, the others having gone to lunch, before she unfolded the rice paper thin sheet and spread it atop the parchment blotter. The routes were inked in pale blue, with circlets drawn at intervals along the Danube's northern curve. One bore a small cross beside it. Santander. She dipped her pen and began marking topographical details: wooded ridges, narrow passes, the monastery ruins near the river bend. She didn't pause until her wrist ached. When she finished, she folded the map back into the ledger and locked it inside her desk drawer. That evening, she met Valen not in the atelier but beneath the arcades of the Menoretenkirch, where the wind funneled bitter and sharp. He pulled her into the shelter of a side entrance and held out his gloved hand. She passed him the map without a word. "We leave in 2 days," he said, sliding the map into his coat. "I'll be assigned to the delegation traveling under the guise of a property inspection. You'll be listed as an archival consultant." "I've never been outside the capital with the court," she said, surprised by her own steadiness. "You'll have to get used to it," he said. "This won't be the last time." She looked up at him, the stone arch casting a lattice of shadow across his face. "And after we discover what they're hiding? We bring it back to the Emperor. But on our terms. Not theirs." She hesitated. "What if it's worse than we think?" "Then we'll be ready." Inside the church, the organ began to play its evening chords. Distant, solemn, like a memory pressing against the present. He stepped back, eyes narrowing slightly. "You still wear your father's ring," he said. She glanced down at her hand. "He gave it to me when he left. Said I'd need something to remind me of my name." He nodded once, then turned away. "Meet me at dawn. The train departs from the eastern platform." She waited until his footsteps faded before slipping through the cloister gate into the night. 2 mornings later, they boarded the train under a veil of fog. The compartments had been reserved in advance, with the delegation seated toward the front. Sibella's place was marked discreetly beside Valen's, an anomaly, but not one anyone dared question aloud. She kept her eyes on the passing bare-limbed orchards outside the window while he reviewed the route again in silence. They arrived just before dusk. Saint-Andre lay quiet beneath a pale sky, its cobbled streets shining with melted frost. The delegation separated upon arrival, each pair fanning out to inspect properties and survey landholdings. Valen took the path that led toward the old Franciscan chapel, where the trees grew close and the river whispered just beyond the ridge. They walked in silence until the town faded behind them. Then Valen spoke. 2 nights from now, they meet at the hill shrine beyond the vineyards. I'll go inside. No, she said, stopping. You need someone who understands the language. Too dangerous. I've read the correspondence. I can pass as a merchant's niece. Just long enough to listen. He met her gaze, brows lowering. You're not trained for this. I'm not meant to be here at all, she said. Neither of us are. He didn't reply right away. A crow passed overhead, its call sharp against the quiet. Finally, he said, there's an orchard behind the shrine. I'll wait there. If anything goes wrong. It won't. He looked at her as if seeing her through a new lens. Not just capable. Certain. Very well, he said. They turned back toward the town as the bells rang the hour. The sun was gone now, leaving only a silver-blue smear over the hills. As they approached the inn where she was meant to lodge, he paused at the threshold. There's something I need you to understand, he said. She waited. If I'd met you in another life, another place. None of this would feel so stolen. She felt the words settle around her like frost, fragile and dangerous. But you didn't, she said, voice low. You met me here. He looked at her, not like a man who wished for another life but one who, despite it all, had chosen this one. She stepped inside without another word, but her heart carried him up the stairs with her. Through the thin walls and the long, sleepless hours ahead. The evening before the shrine meeting, Sibella stood at the edge of the vineyard path, her boots catching the last dry leaves clinging to the stones. The hills sloped quietly around her, silvered by moonlight, the air brittle with the scent of pressed grapes and distant hearth smoke. She wore a linen shawl dyed in a subdued provincial pattern, her hair pinned looser than court fashion allowed. Nothing about her posture, dress, or expression marked her as imperial. Valen waited behind the low wall of the orchard, concealed by the gnarled branches of plum trees whose fruit had long been harvested. He had not spoken since they left the town, which suited her. Words would only make what came next heavier. She moved forward alone, following the narrow trail through the grass toward the shrine. It rose in silhouette above a scattering of torches more than she expected. Soft chanting floated through the trees, in a dialect she recognized but hadn't heard in full voice since her childhood. It wasn't Ottoman Turkish. It was older, Balkanized, threaded with Arabic cadences and Slavic consonants. She paused just beyond the torchlight, close enough to hear, far enough not to be seen. A group of men stood in a semicircle near the altar, their backs turned. One wore a dark wool cloak with a threaded hem, clerical, but not Catholic. Another held a scroll. The one reading spoke slowly, his accent thick with the vowels of Anatolia. We do not seek blood. Only place. Only the return of what was given once and denied again. A younger voice responded. The Danube will not divide us. More voices joined. Not by sword. Not by treaty. She stepped back, breath shallow. This wasn't a political summit. It was a gathering of oath-takers. The kind who moved quietly, who did not raise banners or armies, but who shifted the loyalties of border settlements and garrisons. Slowly. Persistently. Then a name was spoken. Mercier. Not shouted. Not accused. Merely mentioned, as one might mention rain at a funeral. Sibella's blood iced. The speaker continued, he moves without full sanction. He looks beyond Vienna. We are watched. Valen had been noticed. She turned, boots soundless on the moss. By the time she reached the orchard, he had already stepped out from behind the wall. They know, she said, voice low. They said your name. His jaw set, but he didn't ask how or why. Then we have less time than I thought. They're not generals, she said. They're builders. They're laying down something slow. Ideological. It won't come in one blow. He nodded once, gaze flicking toward the hills. We'll leave before sunrise. I'll have the constables detain the ringleaders quietly. No proclamations. No trials. Not yet. They'll slip through, she said. They've done this before. Then we'll follow the ones who don't. They walked back to town in silence, cutting through a field where the frost had begun to settle. When they reached the edge of the stone bridge, he stopped. I should tell you something, he said, not quite facing her. Before we return. She stepped closer, the wind tugging at the hem of her skirt. I've been offered a posting in Constantinople, he said. A diplomatic assignment. Permanent. Her heartbeat stalled. She didn't move. I haven't answered, he added. Because I don't know what I want anymore. She didn't look away from him. You used to. He turned then, and the rawness in his expression startled her. I used to think duty was the only honor left to me, he said. But now I. She reached for his hand, bare now in the cold. Her fingers closed over his without hesitation. You don't have to choose between honor and your life, she said. It can be both. His hand tightened around hers. Not in desperation. In recognition. I don't want to leave Vienna, he said. Then don't. The bells in the town square struck midnight, high and clear over the roofs below. He stepped closer, voice quiet. If I stay, it won't be as before. I won't be able to keep you distant. I wouldn't let you. They stood there as the wind shifted, carrying the night across the vineyards, the shrine, the orchards that had borne witness to secrets centuries old. Somewhere in the stillness, the future stirred, not promised, but possible. And neither of them looked away.